At the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, where decisions worth millions of dollars are made with a single nod, Claire Montgomery, the powerful CEO of a major hotel corporation, stood face to face with a man wearing a service staff uniform. She did not beat around the bush. No explanations, no emotion, just one short, cold, decisive sentence. "You're fired." The room was so silent that the soft hum of the air conditioning behind them could be heard. In previous cases, this moment usually came with tears, panic, or desperate pleas for mercy. But not from this man. He didn't beg, he didn't get angry, he didn't ask why. He stood still for a few seconds, as if weighing something far more important than the job he had just lost. Then he lifted his head and looked directly at the powerful woman in front of him, his voice low, slow, but steady. "If today truly is my last day, please don't tell my daughter that I was fired. Let her believe that I'm still trying." That single sentence alone made the woman who had always believed emotions were a weakness freeze in place. She did not know that, from that moment on, everything she believed about strength, power, and human beings would never be the same again. Daniel Brooks was not the kind of person who stood out in a crowd. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, and he had never believed his life contained anything special worth telling. Every morning, Daniel's day began at 5:30 a.m., not because of an alarm clock, but because of the soft, steady sound of his young daughter breathing from the room next door. That sound was what reminded him to wake up, even when he had barely slept the night before. The small apartment on Chicago's South Side had only one bedroom. Daniel had given that room to Lily. As for him, he slept on an old, worn-out sofa, one side of the backrest sagging after years of use. He never complained, because to him, as long as his daughter could sleep peacefully, every inconvenience became insignificant. By 6 o'clock, Daniel was in the kitchen. Breakfast was simple: fried eggs, toasted bread, and a glass of warm milk. Lily sat on her chair wearing pajamas that were slightly too big for her, eating while telling her father about her day at school, about rehearsals for the school play, about how she would be standing in the front row of her class. Daniel listened to everything. He smiled. Even though behind those eyes was exhaustion accumulated over many years, without a single moment of proper rest. 3 years earlier, his wife had died in a traffic accident. An ordinary afternoon, an unfinished text message, and then everything ended. Daniel went through months when he was barely himself. Work neglected, bills piling up. The apartment was as messy as his own mind at the time. Until one night, Lily climbed onto the sofa, crawled into his arms, and asked a question Daniel would never forget. "Daddy, will you leave me too, as Mommy did?" He held her tightly, and in that moment, he made himself one single promise. Even if the world were to collapse, he would never let his daughter face it alone. From that day on, Daniel did everything he could. He took early shifts, late shifts, weekend overtime. He did anything as long as there was enough money for rent, enough for his daughter's school fees, enough for Lily to have a stable life, even if it was just barely enough. He didn't dream of wealth. He didn't seek promotion. The only thing Daniel wanted was to be standing at the school gate on time every afternoon, to see his daughter run toward him, take his hand, and believe that her father was still trying for her. If Daniel Brooks lived at the lowest level of the city, then Claire Montgomery existed at the complete opposite end. Her office was located on the top floor of Montgomery Tower, a structure of glass and steel rising straight into the Chicago skyline, where the city lights at night looked like a miniature map, and the people below were reduced to anonymous moving points of light. Claire liked that feeling: distance, separation. From above, everything appeared neat, orderly, and easy to control. She was 38 years old, the CEO of Montgomery Hospitality Group, a corporation that owned a chain of luxury hotels and restaurants stretching from Chicago to Boston to New York. Thousands of employees, billions of dollars in revenue, and a name that consistently appeared on lists of the most powerful female leaders in America. But what no one knew was that behind the billion-dollar contracts and flawless speeches, Claire Montgomery had grown up in a world with no room for tenderness. Her father, Richard Montgomery, was the founder of the corporation, a man who believed that life was a series of trials and that the weak would be eliminated. He never held his daughter when she cried, never praised her when she succeeded. The only thing he gave Claire was tests. When Claire was 16, he cut off all her credit cards without warning. No money, no assistance, no explanation. He said only one sentence: "You have 1 month to take care of yourself. If you can't do it, you don't deserve to inherit anything." Claire lived in a cheap hostel near a subway station. She worked 3 jobs at the same time, serving coffee in the mornings, cleaning hotel rooms at midday, and working retail night shifts. She ate instant noodles for weeks. She never slept a whole night. She cried in public restrooms, then wiped her face, straightened her back, and kept going. When the month ended, her father invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant. He looked at her, nodded, and said, "You passed." That was the only time in her life Claire felt she had come that close to recognition. From that day on, she learned the lesson her father had always wanted to teach her. Emotion was a luxury. Trust was a weakness. And the only way to understand a person was to take away what they needed most and observe how they reacted. Claire carried that philosophy with her throughout adulthood. She rose to the position of CEO not through softness, but through a decision-making style cold enough to be ruthless. She did not form close relationships with employees. She did not trust subordinates. She never allowed anyone to cross her personal boundaries. To Claire Montgomery, people existed in only 2 states: effective or unnecessary. And then, as the annual performance review season approached, Claire decided to do something she believed was entirely logical. She did not delegate the task to human resources. She did not trust reports, statistics, or second-hand evaluations. She wanted to see the true nature of the people working for her with her own eyes. That was how the test was born. Claire summoned employees to her office one by one: chefs, receptionists, shift managers, service staff. Each person entered believing it was a routine evaluation, and each of them heard the same sentence, word for word: "You're fired." Claire observed them like a scientist observing an experiment. Some begged, some became angry, some broke down in tears. Some left in silence, completely shattered. Every reaction confirmed what she had believed for years. When pushed into a corner, people think only of themselves. Until Daniel Brooks walked into that room. Claire still remembered that afternoon clearly. He wore a restaurant staff uniform, a white shirt, black trousers, simple, neat, with no unnecessary details. He didn't walk timidly like the others, nor did he project excessive confidence. It was simply a calm, steady gait, as if he were accustomed to accepting whatever came his way. Claire assumed he would be just like the rest, a predictable reaction, a forgettable story. She had no idea that in just a few short minutes, that man would become the first crack in the wall she had spent nearly 40 years building. And more importantly, Claire Montgomery, the woman who believed she understood people completely, for the first time in her life, had judged someone entirely wrong. Daniel Brooks sat down in the chair across from Claire Montgomery's desk. From that position, he could see the entire city of Chicago stretching out behind her, roads like silver threads, high-rise buildings arranged in neat rows, everything looking distant, small, much like the feeling of a man about to lose the only job keeping his family alive. Claire did not keep him waiting. She was accustomed to delivering sentences that decided other people's fates without explanation. Her gaze was calm, her voice concise and precise. "Daniel Brooks, we have decided to terminate your employment." No preface, no procedural apology, just a dry, cold statement, as if it were merely a number being crossed off a spreadsheet. For the first few seconds, Daniel said nothing. He didn't frown, he didn't clench his fists, he didn't react like someone who had just been pushed to the edge of his life. Claire was used to those reactions. She waited for a sign, panic, a desperate plea, or, at the very least, a question. Why? But Daniel did not. He sat still, his eyes fixed on an undefined point on the desk. There was something very different in his expression. Not anger, not complete resignation, but a deep, quiet sorrow, heavy with weight. Finally, he took a deep breath. When Daniel lifted his head, his eyes met Claire's directly. Not defiant, not resentful. Just a calm look, so calm that it demanded attention. His voice was low and slow, as if every word had been carefully considered. "Thank you for allowing me to work here, Ms. Montgomery." Claire frowned slightly. That was not the reaction she expected. She thought he would stop there, but Daniel wasn't finished. He looked down at his calloused hands, hands that had carried thousands of food trays, wiped countless tables, done whatever it took to earn a wage just enough to survive. Then he looked up again. This time his voice was softer, not weak, but sincere to the point of almost pleading. "If today truly is my last day here," he paused briefly, "then I have one request." The room fell utterly silent. The ticking of the clock on Claire's desk echoed steadily, as if counting every second of a moment that was changing everything. "Please, don't tell my daughter that I was fired." Claire felt her chest tighten. Daniel continued, his voice steady, yet something fragile lay beneath it. "Let her believe that I'm still trying. I don't want her to think her father has given up." There was no self-defense, no mention of money, no talk of debts or hardship. Just a father trying to preserve his child's last piece of faith. In that moment, Claire Montgomery, the woman who believed she understood every human being, felt something catch in her throat. She had prepared herself for every possible scenario, except this one. She had believed that when pushed into a corner, people revealed their selfishness. But the man in front of her had chosen to reveal love. Claire leaned back in her chair, forcing her voice to remain composed. "This was only a test, Mr. Brooks. You are not actually fired." Daniel blinked. Confusion flickered across his face, but there was no relief like Claire had seen in others. She continued, explaining her philosophy of employee evaluation, how she wanted to see the true nature of people under pressure. Daniel stood up. He wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice. He said, his tone low and firm, "That is a cruel test." The short sentence rang out like a judgment. He nodded once, didn't wait for Claire's permission, then turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, Daniel stopped. He turned back and looked at Claire one last time. "I hope you found what you were looking for." The door closed. Claire remained alone in the vast office. For the first time in many years, silence was no longer her ally. Because somewhere deep inside, Claire Montgomery understood that an important rule had just been broken. The door closed behind Daniel Brooks, leaving Claire Montgomery alone in a room so vast it felt cold. The city of Chicago still stretched beyond the thick glass, traffic continuing to flow without pause, as if the moment that had just passed had never existed. But for Claire, something had shifted off its familiar course. She sat there for a long time, her gaze fixed on the empty chair across from her desk, the place where, only minutes earlier, a man had been sitting with no power, no ambition, yet leaving behind a question she had never been forced to face before. Since when could a test hurt someone so deeply? That night, Claire stayed in the office later than usual, not because of contracts, nor because of figures waiting for approval. She opened Daniel Brooks's personnel file. 2 years of employment, not a single late arrival, not one complaint. Always requested early shifts so he could pick up his child, always volunteering for overtime when the restaurant was short-staffed. The dry lines on the page did not tell a dramatic story, but when placed side by side, they formed an obvious picture. A person quietly carrying his responsibilities, day after day. At the end of the file, there was a brief note from Human Resources. Wife died in a traffic accident, raising a child alone. Claire closed the folder, leaned back in her chair, and closed her eyes for a moment. The image of Daniel in her office returned to her mind. Not angry, not afraid. Just a father trying to protect his daughter's belief. In the days that followed, Claire began to notice Daniel in a very different way, not as a CEO monitoring an employee, but as someone trying to understand a human being. She read his shift reports, reviewed notes from restaurant managers. For the first time in her career, Claire paid attention to the small details. Daniel always arrived at least 15 minutes before his shift, not to score points, but to prepare everything before the restaurant opened. When a coworker called in sick, he was the first to nod and take the shift. No questions about extra pay, no complaints. Some evenings, he stayed after closing time to help clean up, even though it wasn't his responsibility. And what caught Claire's attention most was this. No one asked him to do it. He did it on his own, as if it were simply the natural thing to do. Through the security cameras, Claire watched Daniel lower himself to eye level with customers, listen carefully, apologize, and resolve situations with a rare sense of calm. He treated the dishwasher the same way he spoke to the head chef. No more, no less. And every day, exactly 30 minutes before his shift ended, Daniel always left. Not earlier, not later. One manager had once noted this as a minor violation. Claire found that record, reread it, and quietly deleted it. That evening, Claire sent out an internal notice. The message was brief, without lengthy explanation. Employees with young children are permitted flexible working hours. No justification required. No exceptions. No one knew why the policy appeared. Claire did not explain. She only knew that every time she saw Daniel leave the restaurant on time, she thought of the same old question, the one that had followed her through many sleepless nights. Is strength truly about standing alone? Claire Montgomery had once believed that only those who needed no one were the strongest. But now, watching a man carry an entire world on his shoulders to keep a promise to his daughter, she began to doubt the very lessons she had lived by her whole life. That awakening was not loud. There was no explosive moment, no tears. It arrived slowly, like a small crack in a thick concrete wall. And Claire had no idea yet that this crack, it was only the beginning. Everything began with a short phone call, one that came at the exact moment Daniel Brooks had no options left. The neighbor who usually watched Lily in the evenings had fallen and broken her arm. She could no longer help him. No family nearby, no backup plan. Daniel called the restaurant, his voice lower and tighter than usual, asking for permission to bring his daughter to work for just one evening. He apologized before he even received an answer, apologized for the inconvenience, apologized for being unprofessional, apologized for his circumstances. On the other end of the line, the shift manager hesitated, then turned to look at Claire Montgomery, who happened to be in the office reviewing the work schedule. Claire said nothing. She nodded. A tiny nod, but for the first time in many years, one of Claire's decisions was not based on performance, but on a human being. That evening, the restaurant was packed, peak hours, the clatter of knives and pans in the kitchen, the clinking of glassware at the bar, the sound of a machine that could not stop. And in a hidden corner, behind the dishwashing area, Lily Brooks sat on a low plastic crate, a coloring book with worn edges in front of her. She wore a pink hoodie, both knees marked with stains not yet washed away, her tongue slightly sticking out as she tried to color carefully, as if her entire world at that moment fit neatly inside those small outlines. Claire stood at the entrance to the staff area, silently observing. That scene did not belong to her world. A child inside a fine dining restaurant. A father mixing drinks while stealing moments to bend down and speak softly to his daughter. Daniel brought Lily a plate of fried chicken and fries. He crouched down to her eye level, said something Claire couldn't hear. Lily smiled. An innocent smile, complete, unaware that her father's life was stretched thin by fragile threads. Daniel kissed her lightly on the forehead, then stood up and returned to the bar, as if everything were okay. Claire turned away. She didn't understand why her chest felt so heavy. Around 9:30 p.m., when the rush finally began to slow, an employee hurried upstairs. "Miss Montgomery, something's wrong." The moment Claire stepped into the kitchen, she saw Daniel. He was holding Lily in his arms. The child's face pressed against her father's shoulder, her breathing shallow. Her forehead is burning hot. Lily cried softly, not the cry of panic, but the exhausted cry of a child with a high fever. Daniel whispered into her ear, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here." But his hands were trembling, and for the first time, Claire saw how frightened a man could be, a man who seemed as though he would never break. "She has a fever," Daniel said when he saw Claire. His voice cracked at the end of the sentence. "I need to take her to the hospital, but I don't have a car. I called for a taxi, no one is answering." Claire didn't think, didn't weigh options, didn't analyze risks. She said only one sentence. "Come with me. My car is downstairs." The SUV pulled out of the underground garage and merged into Chicago's night traffic. A light rain fell. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. In the back seat, Daniel held Lily tightly. He whispered to her continuously, as if his voice were the only thread keeping her anchored to reality. Claire watched them through the rearview mirror. Daniel's hand stroked his daughter's hair, slow, familiar movements, so full of love that her throat tightened. The hospital admitted Lily quickly. The doctor said it was just a viral infection, not dangerous, but she needed to be monitored overnight. Daniel sat beside the hospital bed, holding his daughter's hand for hours. He didn't leave her side for even a moment. Claire stood near the window. For the first time, she didn't know where she belonged in that room. After a long silence, Daniel spoke. "Thank you. Without you, I don't know what I would have done." Claire didn't turn around. She stared out at the distant city, and the lights were blurring in her eyes. "You would have figured it out," she said softly. "You always do." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then spoke slowly. "My wife once told me something. She said, 'Strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about surviving for someone. The words fell into the stillness of the hospital room like a drop of water on a calm lake. Claire turned to look at Lily, the small hand still tightly gripping her father's, her face asleep, completely trusting. And suddenly, a truth struck Claire Montgomery with painful clarity. All her life, she had learned how to survive very well. But standing in front of that scene, she understood that she had never learned how to live. And in that long night, as the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, something inside Claire changed forever. The next morning, the city of Chicago woke up as it always did. The subway trains still ran. The coffee shops are still open. Life went on, indifferent, as if the night before no child had been forced to stay in a hospital bed. But somewhere beneath the surface, an undercurrent had begun to rise. 3 days later, the photo appeared. It wasn't sharp. The pale yellow lighting of the hospital parking lot blurred the details, but it was clear enough to recognize the face of Claire Montgomery, the powerful CEO who usually appeared only on conference stages or the covers of business magazines. In the photo, Claire was holding a sleeping child. A man stood behind her, his face half obscured but his figure unmistakable. A headline appeared on an entertainment news site. Billionaire Claire Montgomery caught late at night with a mysterious child. What's the real story? By noon, the story had spread across social media. By afternoon, major television networks were covering it. By evening, it had become a national conversation across the United States. Who was the child? Who was the man? Why had Claire never mentioned this before? Did she have a secret life behind her familiar, cold, distant image? Claire released a brief statement through her communications team. I assisted a family during an emergency. There is no secret child. But the truth no longer mattered. People didn't want answers. They wanted drama. Just a few hours later, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The large conference room was flooded with cold, white light. Men and women in expensive suits looked at Claire as if she had committed an unforgivable mistake. The stock is falling, the CFO spoke first, his tone clipped and sharp. A personal scandal could destroy investor confidence, another board member added. Then the name was spoken. Daniel Brooks. He's one of our employees, someone in the room said, and he's becoming the center of this story. Nothing more needed to be said. The solution was obvious. Fire him, a voice said. Cut all ties. Make it clear this has nothing to do with the company. Claire looked around the table. Familiar faces, people she had once believed understood the rules of the game the same way she did. No, she said. Just one word, but it was enough to silence the room. Claire, one member spoke up, this isn't personal. This is business. No, she repeated, her voice lower but firmer. He is a father, and I will not destroy his life to save my image. A heavy silence followed. Then we will be forced to act, another person said. The board has the authority. The meeting ended in tension. Claire left the conference room with steady steps, but when the elevator doors closed, she realized her hands were trembling. That evening, Claire sat alone in her office. She held her phone, writing and deleting messages to Daniel over and over again. I'm sorry. Not enough. This isn't your fault. Not true. In the end, she was left with only one option. The next morning, Claire called Daniel up to her office. He entered with a tired face, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep and worry. Claire saw it, and in that moment, she knew the decision she was about to make would haunt her for a long time to come. Daniel, she said slowly. I need you to take some time off, just until things settle down. Daniel looked at her. No surprise, no anger, just an empty gaze, as if he had already been prepared for this. So in the end you chose them, he said quietly. You tested me to see who I was. Now I know who you are. Claire wanted to speak, to explain, to say that she was trying to protect him, but words could not repair a moment of betrayal. Daniel stood up. Before leaving, he turned back, his voice painfully calm. The worst part isn't losing my job. It's that I started to believe you actually cared. The door closed. Claire sat alone in the vast room. This time there was no test left to hide behind, because what she had just lost was not an employee, but the trust of a human being. 3 days after Daniel Brooks walked out of that office, Claire Montgomery still had not gone home even once. The penthouse apartment on the top floor of Montgomery Tower remained spotless, brightly lit, perfect as always. Yet so empty it was almost suffocating. Instead, Claire slept on the small sofa in her office, waking up among stacks of files and cold fluorescent lights. She didn't sign any new contracts, didn't attend any meetings, didn't return calls from the board of directors. She sat there, silent, and replayed a single sentence in her mind over and over again. I started to believe that you actually cared. It wasn't loud, it wasn't accusatory, yet it weighed heavier than any accusation ever could. Claire reopened Daniel Brooks's file. This time she didn't skim. She read every line, as if searching for some detail that might help her justify herself. 2 years of employment, not a single personal leave day, except when his daughter was sick. Small notes from shift managers. Daniel stayed after closing to help clean. Daniel swapped shifts with a coworker who had no ride home. Daniel never complained about split shifts. No major achievements, no standout moments, just a long sequence of quiet kindnesses that no one had ever acknowledged. Claire closed the file. For the first time in her life, she could not convince herself that she had done the right thing. She remembered the hospital room that night. Lily's small hand was gripping her father's tightly. Daniel's eyes as he asked, "Do those tests really make you stronger?" That question had never found an answer. On the morning of the 4th day, the board of directors sent Claire a brief email. No embellishment, no threats, just a simple ultimatum. Either permanently terminate Daniel Brooks or step down from your position as CEO. Claire stared at the screen for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. In that moment, the image of her father appeared more clearly than ever. The cold tests, the lessons about strength, about never allowing emotion to influence decisions. And then, another image broke through. Daniel standing in front of her office desk, asking for nothing for himself, only for his daughter. Claire opened her eyes. For the first time, she understood something she had never dared to consider before. Some decisions are correct, but not courageous. True strength, it is not about holding on to power at all costs, but about daring to let it go when it begins to hurt others. That afternoon, Claire left the office early. No assistant, no driver, no schedule. She drove herself to the south side where there were no glass towers, no red carpets, only aging buildings and dim yellow lights. It began to rain. Raindrops tapped softly against the windshield, keeping time with a decision that had come too late, yet not too late. Claire parked across the street from Daniel's building. She sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel, unable to open the door. She had faced hostile boardrooms, stood before billion-dollar deals, but stepping out of this car was the hardest thing she had ever done. Finally, Claire took a deep breath and opened the door. The old staircase echoed with her footsteps. The smell of cooking oil and worn carpet filled the air. She stopped in front of apartment 3C, knocked, footsteps inside. Then the door opened. Daniel Brooks stood there. Gray t-shirt, jeans. His hair was still damp, as if he had just showered. When he saw Claire, his eyes closed off immediately. No anger, no surprise. Just an invisible distance that had formed between them. "What are you doing here?" His voice was calm but stripped of all warmth. Claire swallowed hard. She had no speech, no strategy, no test to hide behind. She had only one truth. "I came to apologize." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in," he said, "but say what you need to say." The door closed behind Claire, and this time there was no power, no title, no test at all. There was only one human being facing the consequences of her own mistake. Daniel Brooks's small apartment was so quiet that the soft sound of rain tapping against the window could be heard. Dim yellow light fell over the worn dining table where Lily's boxes of colored pencils and drawing paper were still scattered. A quiet reminder that this was not a world of meetings or power, but the world of a family struggling to survive one day at a time. Daniel stood leaning against the wall near the door, arms crossed, keeping his distance. Claire sat down on the edge of the sofa. For the first time in many years, she didn't know where to place her hands. She took a deep breath, not to steady herself for a negotiation, but to gather the courage to say the things she had avoided for so long. "I'm sorry," Claire said. Her voice was soft but clear. "Not because of the photo, not because of the pressure from the board, but because I was wrong." Daniel didn't respond. His gaze remained cold, but no longer sharp like the day he walked out of that high-floor office. It was simply the exhaustion of someone who had hoped too much, then been forced to accept that he had been mistaken. Claire looked up at him. This time she didn't avoid his eyes. "I thought I was protecting the company," she continued. "I thought I was doing the strong thing. But in reality, I was only protecting myself." Daniel tightened his jaw. He took a few steps closer, yet still kept enough distance so they didn't touch. "You didn't just take my job," he said slowly. "You made me feel like I had no value, as if everything I do every day, for my daughter, for my work, wasn't worth anyone standing up for." The words weren't loud, they weren't harsh, but each one fell heavily, impossible to take back. Claire felt her chest tighten. She wanted to turn away, but she knew she had no right to. "You're right," she said, "and I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know that I see you now. Too late, but sincerely." She bent down and opened the handbag beside her, took out a thick envelope and placed it gently on the table. Daniel glanced at it but didn't touch it. "That's not severance pay," Claire said immediately, as if afraid he might misunderstand. "And it's not pity." She slid the envelope toward him. "It's a new contract. Director of Operations for the restaurant division. Authority over scheduling, staffing, and policy. A salary several times higher than before. Not for me, because you deserve it." Daniel finally picked up the envelope. He opened it, skimmed the contents. His eyes paused on the numbers. Then he folded it and set it down. "Why now?" he asked. "Why not 3 days ago when I needed someone on my side the most?" The question hung in the air. Claire felt her eyes burn. She no longer tried to hide it. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Afraid of losing everything. Afraid to admit that you mattered more than my title. And I chose wrong." Daniel sat down in the chair across from her. He covered his face with his hands for a few seconds. When he lowered them, his voice was deeper. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Claire nodded. "I know," she said, "and I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm only asking you to give me a chance to prove that this time I won't run away." Silence filled the room. Then the bedroom door opened slightly. A small figure appeared in the hallway. "Daddy?" Lily rubbed her eyes, her voice still sleepy. Daniel stood up immediately. He bent down and picked her up. "How are you feeling?" "I feel better," Lily whispered. Then her eyes landed on Claire. Her face lit up. "Auntie Claire!" She ran over and wrapped her arms around Claire's leg as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Claire froze. She didn't know what to do. She looked at Daniel, panicked. Daniel said nothing. He only gave a tiny nod. Claire knelt down and wrapped her arms around Lily, gently, carefully, as if one wrong movement might shatter the moment. "I missed you," Claire said, her voice trembling. Lily looked up at her with clear eyes. "Daddy said you were busy, but I knew you would come." An innocent sentence, but enough to break the final wall inside Claire. She cried, unrestrained, unhidden. Daniel stood there watching the scene. In his eyes, it wasn't forgiveness, but something had softened. Lily turned to her father. "Are you still working at the restaurant?" Daniel looked at Claire, then at his daughter. "Yes," he said slowly. "I'm still working." Lily beamed. "That's good. I like Auntie Claire." Daniel smiled, a tiny smile, but for the first time in many days, it carried no weight. In that small apartment, amid the damp scent of rain and the old yellow light, something had changed. Not because of a contract, not because of a title, but because the truth had finally been spoken, and someone had been brave enough to listen. 2 months after that rainy evening, Claire Montgomery stood in front of a room filled with reporters. No flashy lights, no dramatic background music, just a simple podium and a woman who, for the first time in her life, was not wearing the flawless armor of power. She looked straight into the camera. No avoidance, no evasions. Claire told the entire story. The photo at the hospital, the man who had asked her not to tell his daughter that he was fired, her own mistake. She didn't blame the media. She didn't accuse the board of directors. She didn't cast herself as a victim. She said only one straightforward thing. "I once believed that strength meant needing no one. But I was wrong. True strength is having the courage to take responsibility for others, even when it costs you something." The room fell silent. Then Claire spoke about Daniel. She announced his appointment as Director of Operations for the restaurant division, not as a gesture to appease public opinion, but as a late yet necessary acknowledgement. "The bravest man I have ever met is not the one who asked to keep his job, but the one who asked to protect his daughter's faith." After that press conference, a few board members resigned. Some shareholders sold their stakes, but most stayed. Not because Claire was perfect, but because, for the first time, they saw a leader willing to say, "I was wrong." 3 months later, on the rooftop of Montgomery Tower, a small garden was completed. Not for VIP receptions, not for promotional photos, but for children. The children of employees. Children who had only ever seen their parents leave early and come home late, who had waited in school libraries, who had grown up in absences too difficult to name. That day, Lily ran across the garden, chasing a small butterfly resting on a flower bed. Her laughter rang out, clear and carefree. Daniel stood beside Claire, hands in his pockets, watching his daughter with a peace he had never known before. "She likes this place," he said. Claire smiled. "That's enough." Daniel turned to look at her. The distance that once existed between them was gone. It wasn't complete closeness yet, but it was something real. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think you were just someone who stood very high." Claire nodded. "And now?" Daniel looked at Lily, then back at Claire. "Now, you're someone who chose to step down." Claire didn't speak. She took his hand. It was warm, steady, and no longer trembling. Lily ran back, grabbing both of their hands. "Are we a family?" she asked softly, as if afraid the question might break the moment. Daniel bent down. So did Claire. "We're people who are trying for each other," Claire answered. Lily beamed. "That's enough." The sun slowly set behind the buildings. The sky turned soft shades of orange and pink-purple. In the middle of that vast city, 3 people stood together, not perfect, not complete, but real. And for the first time in 38 years, Claire Montgomery no longer felt as though she were merely surviving. She was living. Some stories aren't about money, not about titles, but about something deeply human. True strength isn't about how high you stand, but about who you are willing to stand beside when it's hardest. If this story made you pause for even a moment, please, like to help share that feeling. Share it if you think someone needs a reminder that they're not alone. And comment to let us know. Who is the person who makes you stronger every day? Don't forget to subscribe to Deep Life Tales so we can continue sharing stories of kindness, awakening, and those moments when people choose to become more human.